This is the silent city of the dead, a photograph of a place that ceased to exist. Its streets are choked with ash, its buildings torn open. A city of 30,000 souls vaporized in 3 minutes. The ruins of the Grand Cathedral, a hollow monument to a prayer that went unanswered. This is the tomb of Saint-Pierre, Martinique. But this was not always a graveyard. Just days before this photograph was taken, this was a paradise. It was known, without exaggeration, as the Paris of the Caribbean, a jewel of the French colonial empire. From the sea, it looked like a postcard, a dense, wealthy city of stone and plaster, tucked against the tropical green. It was a city of impossible beauty, one of the most vibrant centers of trade and culture in the Western Hemisphere. And watching over it all was the mountain, Mount Pelée. It was the city's backdrop, its guardian, the source of its fertile soil and fresh water. From the streets of Saint-Pierre, the peak was a majestic, calming presence, a postcard-perfect volcano. It was lush, green, and quiet. It had been quiet for 50 years. It was considered extinct, a beautiful, sleeping giant, or so they thought. The city's lifeblood was its harbour, the raid of Saint-Pierre. It was the economic engine of Martinique. Dozens of international steamships and schooners anchored here, loading sugar, rum, and cacao for the world. The city's main landing was a constant bustle of activity, goods and people arriving and departing. The city's quay, the Place Bertin, was the centre of this commercial world. Along the waterfront, a long, beautiful seaside road was the pride of the city. The Place Bertin was the main square, the heart of the city's social and economic life. It was a grand, open plaza, lined with trees and facing the sea. Here, the island's semaphore stood, relaying signals to the ships in the harbour. The Grand Chamber of Commerce building dominated one side of the square, a testament to the city's wealth. The Bank of Martinique. The entire island's financial reserves were held here. The customs house, processing the wealth that flowed through the port. The lighthouse on the quay, guiding ships into the prosperous harbour. But Saint-Pierre was more than just rich. It was cultured. The streets were immaculate. Drawings and early photographs show a sophisticated European city transplanted into the tropics. Life was lived in its streets, a fusion of French and Creole culture. Clean water flowed from the mountains, powering its fountains and industries. Women washed laundry in the clear Roxlane River. The city market was legendary, filled with tropical fruits, vegetables, and fresh fish. It was a city of modern engineering. Iron bridges like the Pont Roche spanned the rivers that cut through the town. The Roxlane River flowed beneath the city's homes and businesses out to the sea. It had a formal government house, the Hôtel de l'Intendance. It had electricity. It had telephones. A colonial fort, the Fort of Saint-Pierre, stood as a symbol of French power, though its cannons were obsolete. The coastal batteries were well maintained, projecting an image of security and permanence. And for its 30,000 citizens, there was the theatre, a magnificent 800-seat building modelled after the theatres of Paris. It was known locally as the Miniature La Scala. It hosted travelling opera companies from France and Italy. This was the centre of high culture, a symbol of the city's view of itself, civilized, sophisticated, and permanent. The city even had a Jardin des Plantes, a world-famous botanical garden. Grand entrance welcomed scholars and tourists from around the globe. It was a scientific and recreational marvel, filled with exotic palm trees and plants collected from across the empire. Its artificial waterfalls and shaded grottos were a popular escape from the tropical heat. The gardens even contained their own museum, filled with geological and biological specimens. Religion was the pillar of daily life. The grand cathedral, Notre-Dame du Bon Port, was the city's spiritual heart. Its interior was a place of cool, quiet reverence, a place of absolute safety. The church of the fort, serving the soldiers and the northern district of the city, the Saint-Étienne du Centre Church. The city was filled with places of worship. It was a city of institutions. The colonial health house, an asylum and hospital, built to last from solid stone. These buildings were not temporary shacks. They were built to endure. Life was good. They held festivals celebrating their prosperity with nautical regattas. This was the world of Saint-Pierre in the spring of 1902, a modern, thriving, confident city, a paradise living in the shadow of a beautiful green mountain. Geological diagrams from the time showed the mountain as a simple fact, a feature of the landscape, its ancient volcanic nature, a distant memory. Travel posters advertised the Pearl of the Antilles, a safe, luxurious destination for tourists. This photograph was taken on the last Sunday before the disaster. The cathedral is full. They have no idea what is about to happen. The market in 1815 and the market in 1900. Decades of peace and prosperity. It was a city that looked to the future, proud of its history. A city that felt permanent, a view of the coast stretching out from the Paris of the Caribbean. From the sea, it was the picture of tranquility. But under the ground, something was beginning to stir. The trouble began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A tremor in the ground on April 23, 1902. It was a minor thing, a curiosity. The mountain, Pelée, had been silent for half a century, but 2 days later, on April 25th, the whispers became a cough. A column of dark smoke and cinders billowed from the summit, visible to the entire city. It was a spectacle. Tourists and locals gathered on the Place Bertin to watch the magnificent, frightening show. Newspapers of the day treated it as a marvel, not a threat. A grand natural fireworks display. The air, once filled with the scent of rum and sea salt, now carried a new smell, a sharp, biting odour of sulphur. Then came the ash. At first, just a fine powder, a nuisance that coated the bright green leaves and elegant streets of the city. Within days it was a thick grey blanket. Horses struggled to pull carriages. The air became difficult to breathe, a constant gritty rain from the sky. The city of Saint-Pierre, the vibrant Paris of the Caribbean, was turning grey. The wealthy residents of Saint-Pierre began to complain about the laundry. The ash was staining everything. The mountain was now a constant, menacing presence, a smoking chimney dominating the skyline. Its rumbles grew louder. Explosions from the crater sent bombs of molten rock arcing into the sky. From the harbour, captains watched with growing unease. This was not a normal or a safe event. The volcano, as drawn by observers, was becoming more violent by the day. But the true horror was not just coming from the sky, it was coming from the ground. The tremors and heat drove the mountain's residents down into the city. First, a plague of insects, foot-long centipedes and swarms of ants, fleeing the hot earth, invading homes, and then the snakes, dozens, then hundreds of venomous fer-de-lance, slithering into the streets, the stables, desperate to escape the volcano. They killed livestock, they killed pets, they bit and killed over 50 people in the days leading up to the eruption. The city was now under siege, poisoned by ash from above and invaded by vipers from below. Panic began to set in. This was the time to leave. This was the final biological warning, but the city's leaders urged calm. Then, on May 5th, the mountain issued its first lethal warning. A shot across the bow. The crater lake, boiling with sulphur and water, breached its rim. It sent a lahar, a boiling concrete-like river of mud, down the Rivière Blanche. This was not lava. This was a scalding high-speed flow of earth, trees, and debris. It moved at over 60 miles an hour. In its path was the usine Guerra, a large sugar processing plant on the coast. The wave of mud hit the factory instantly. It buried the entire facility. It buried the owner and over 25 workers in 60 feet of boiling cement. The flow was so massive it pushed into the sea, creating a 10-foot-high tsunami that flooded the low-lying parts of Saint-Pierre. This event was an unmistakable message. The mountain was not putting on a show. It was a killer. The refugees who did flee the countryside fled into Saint-Pierre, believing the city to be the only safe place. The population swelled with the terrified. The city was now a trap. The air was unbreathable. The water was contaminated with ash. The constant booming explosions from the crater were deafening. The ground itself seemed to be in constant motion. The steamship Roraima arrived in the harbour on May the 6th. Its passengers were horrified. The city they expected, the Paris of the Caribbean, was a grey, choking city of doom. This is a photograph of the Roraima in the harbour, taken just one day before it was destroyed. They were told it was safe to stay. The mountain, meanwhile, was growing. A new, ominous spine of rock was being pushed out of the crater, glowing red at night. This is an illustration of the eruption on May the 7th, the day before the end, a column of blackness that towered 10,000 feet. The noise was so loud it was heard 500 miles away, but in Saint-Pierre it was a terrifying, all-encompassing roar. The city's beautiful streets were now landscapes of ash. It piled up like snowdrifts. The once clear Roxelane River, where women did their laundry, was now a choked grey torrent of mud. The Pont Roche, the iron bridge, stood over a river of sludge. The city's infrastructure was failing. The city was dark. Even at noon, the ash cloud was so thick it blocked out the sun, a constant, terrifying twilight. Citizens were in a state of shock. They huddled in their homes or in the perceived safety of the cathedral. This is a sketch of the city as seen from the sea in the first week of May. It is a city under bombardment from nature. The harbour was thick with ash. The water itself was warm to the touch. Dead fish, boiled by the sulphurous runoff, floated everywhere. This is a scientific diagram showing the stages of the eruption. The city of Saint-Pierre, sitting directly in the path of the Nuée Ardente, the glowing cloud. They didn't know the term for it yet, but they were about to witness its birth. This is how the city appeared to those who had fled to nearby villages like Morne Rouge, a pillar of fire and smoke. The chapel at Morne Rouge was filled with people praying for the souls of Saint-Pierre even before the final cataclysm. Refugees were already fleeing to the neighbouring island of St. Lucia. But for 30,000 people it was too late. This is what the mountain looked like at night, a terrifying, glowing monster, the crater a gateway to hell. This stereoscopic image was one of the last ever taken, a terrible volcanic explosion, but this was only the prelude. The people of Saint-Pierre had endured 2 weeks of this, 2 weeks of ash, poison, snakes, and terror. This photograph shows the mountain in its Stage 1 eruption, a vertical plume, annoying but not deadly to the city itself. This diagram shows Stage 2, the moment the pressure could no longer be contained, the moment the cloud would break and flow downward. This is a map of the city and its harbour. Every ship marked here is about to be incinerated, such as the Roraima. It sat at anchor waiting for cargo that would never be loaded. This is the night of May 7th. The city is in darkness. The streets are empty, covered in a thick, wet layer of ash. It is a city of 30,000 people waiting for the end of the world. And it is Ascension Day, a holy day. The last Sunday, the cathedral was full. They prayed for deliverance. They believed the mountain was a sign of God's anger. They believed if they stayed and prayed, they would be spared. The mountain, however, was not listening to prayers. It was a geological event, a pressure valve that was about to fail, with 30,000 people living at the exhaust. The city was in a state of terror. The air was unbreathable. The ground was shaking. The port was filling with dead fish. The logical human response was to flee. Thousands tried. They packed their belongings and headed for the roads leading south, away from the monster, but they were told to stay. They were, in fact, forced to stay. The natural disaster was about to become a man-made catastrophe. This is the man who sealed their fate. Governor Louis Mouttet, the highest authority on the island. Governor Mouttet had a problem. And it wasn't the volcano, it was politics. A critical, contentious election was scheduled for Sunday, May 11th. The panic was inconvenient. A mass evacuation of Saint-Pierre, the island's political and economic heart, would disrupt the election and cause a financial crisis. He could not let that happen. So he did the unforgivable. He lied. He issued official proclamations that there was no danger. He ordered soldiers to patrol the roads, turning back the thousands of refugees who were trying to escape. He forced them back into the city. The city was no longer a home. It was a prison. The fort's cannons, once symbols of protection, now represented an authority that was holding them captive. To quiet the growing hysteria, Mouttet created a scientific commission tasked with studying the volcano. The commission was led by a high school teacher. They made a brief journey toward the mountain, were spooked by an explosion, and turned back. Their conclusion, published in the local paper on May 7th, was fatally wrong. There is nothing in the volcano's activity to warrant a departure from the city. The safety of Saint-Pierre is complete. It was a death sentence, disguised as science. The city's elite, its businessmen, trusted this assessment. They needed to protect their property, their banks, and their chamber of commerce, their sugar and rum warehouses, and so they repeated the lie. Business as usual. The city's beautiful streets were now clogged with people, a mix of terrified residents and refugees from the countryside who had been told the city was the only safe place. The once Grand Hôtel de l'Intendance, the government house, was now a centre of catastrophic misinformation. The only people who truly understood the danger were the ship captains in the harbour. They were not politicians, they were sailors. They knew the weather, and they knew fear. The harbour was a scene from a nightmare. The water was hot. Ash rained down, snapping taut anchor chains. This map shows the harbour of Saint-Pierre. It is an open roadstead offering no protection from the mountain. The volcano looms directly over it. The captains of a dozen ships begged the port authorities for clearance to leave. They were refused. To allow them to leave would be to admit the danger. It would cause a panic. So over 18 ships were forced to remain at anchor, pointed directly at their executioner. They were trapped by bureaucracy. This map, created after the disaster, shows the result. A graveyard of ships. Every vessel marked here was annihilated. Only one ship, the Roddam, which had arrived late and was still building steam, managed to escape. Its captain was severely burned, but he broke the rules, cut his anchor, and fled. The others were not so lucky. The Roraima, which had arrived just 2 days earlier, sat and waited, its passengers watching the fireworks from the deck. Back on shore, the city's social life continued in a parody of its former self. The streets were dark, but people clung to routine. They celebrated their festivals. The city's elite pretended this was all a grand adventure. They were encouraged by Governor Mouttet. To prove the city was safe, he made a fatal gesture of public relations. On May 7th, the day after, the sugar mill was annihilated. The day after the snake invasion, he and his wife travelled into Saint-Pierre. They stayed in the government house, a grand residence on the Place Bertin, to show the population that their leader was with them. It was a fatal act of arrogance. He was so certain of his own authority, so convinced of his own narrative, that he gambled his life and the life of his wife. This is the man who told 30,000 people to ignore the roaring of the earth, to ignore the falling ash, to ignore their own instincts. He staked his reputation on the mountain, holding its peace for just a few more days, just until the election was over. As night fell on May 7th, the city was in total darkness. The ash cloud was so thick it eclipsed the moon and stars. The streets were empty. The city, once the Paris of the Caribbean, was now a grey, silent tomb waiting for a burial. The mountain was a constant, deafening roar, a continuous explosion like a global cannonade. This image, a contemporary drawing, tries to capture the terror of that final night. The mountain glowing, spitting fire and rock. The grand cathedral was full. It was Ascension Day, a holy day. Thousands gathered inside, believing the stone walls and the power of their faith would protect them. This was the cathedral just days before, a place of sanctuary. This is the main altar, the centerpiece of their worship. The city's theatre, once a symbol of its culture, was dark and empty. There would be no more performances. The lighthouse on the quay, its light, if it was even lit, was invisible through the suffocating ash. The beautiful Place Bertin, the city's heart, was coated in feet of volcanic snow. Its elegant fountain was silent, choked with mud. The market, usually bustling at this hour as merchants prepared for the morning, was deserted. The bridges over the Roxelane River were empty. The river itself was a thick, bubbling slurry of ash and water. This image, though taken after the event, shows the city as it waited. A collection of buildings, of streets, of lives, all held hostage by one man's political gamble. The city was a tinderbox filled with 30,000 souls, and the man who locked the doors, Governor Louis Mouttet, was now inside with them. He had gambled everything on the volcano, waiting just one more day. The mountain, as it appeared from a distance, was a pillar of apocalyptic fire. This diagram shows the scientific reality. The pressure was building. The side of the crater was bulging. It was no longer a stage 1 vertical eruption. It was preparing for stage 2, a lateral blast, a horizontal cannon aimed directly at the city. The people of Saint-Pierre went to sleep, if they could sleep at all, to the sound of their own doom. The ships in the harbour, like the Roraima, bobbed in the hot, ashy water, their crews waiting for a dawn that would never arrive. The city, from the sea, a dark shape against a glowing mountain. A city of the dead that just didn't know it yet. This travel poster advertised the Pearl of the Antilles, a tropical paradise. But on the night of May 7th, 1902, it was a city of 30,000 prisoners, waiting for an executioner that had been authorized by their own government. Governor Moutet's gamble was about to be called, and the mountain did not care about the election. Day, May 8th, 1902, Ascension Day. At 7:52 a.m., the city's cathedral bell chimed for morning mass. Then the world ended. 4 deafening explosions were heard, like a broadside from a battleship, but 1,000 times louder. The gamble had failed. The mountain, which had been building pressure for 2 weeks, finally, catastrophically, failed. But it did not erupt upwards. The stage 1 eruption was over. This was stage 2. The side of the volcano facing Saint-Pierre split open. It unleashed a horizontal cannon blast. A superheated, dense cloud of ash, gas, and rock that was heavier than air. This was the birth of a new, terrifying word in the human vocabulary, the Nuée Ardente, the glowing cloud. We call it a pyroclastic flow. It is not lava, it is not smoke, it is an avalanche of pure death, a high-speed, 1,000 degrees Celsius cloud that kills in 3 ways. Modern eruptions, like at Mount St. Helens, show us the force. A blast that can flatten entire forests in seconds. Eruptions at Soufriere Hills show how this cloud, heavier than air, hugs the ground and moves at hurricane speeds. At Mount Unzen in Japan, a similar flow was filmed. It moves with a terrifying, intelligent speed. This is what came for Saint-Pierre. First, the shock wave, a wave of compressed, superheated air, moving at the speed of sound. It shattered stone walls and burst human lungs. Second, the heat. Over 1,000 degrees Celsius, or about 800 degrees, it instantly vaporized every living thing. It flash-boiled the water in their bodies. Third, the flow itself. A 100-mile-per-hour avalanche of suffocating ash and rock that buried the city in seconds. This diagram, drawn by scientists after the event, shows the city's helpless position. It was living in the barrel of a gun, and the mountain had just pulled the trigger. This is a contemporary illustration based on the accounts of sailors who watched from the sea, a black wall of death rolling down the mountain. The city of 30,000 people was 4 miles away. For the cloud, it was a 3-minute journey. For the people in the cathedral praying at their 7:52 a.m. Mass, there was perhaps 1 second to register the sound before the walls caved in. This is the city's main altar before, and this is after. Twisted, melted, and buried. Governor Mouttet and his wife, in the government house on the Place Bertin, were at ground zero. They were incinerated instantly. The city was set ablaze. Warehouses of rum and molasses exploded, sending rivers of flaming liquor running through the streets. The city did not just die, it was cremated. This illustration, titled "The End of the World," was not an exaggeration. This photograph, taken later in 1902, shows the Nuée Ardente as it continued to erupt for months. A dark, heavy, deathly cloud. This is the force that hit the city, a 1,000-degree hurricane. The blast was not confined to the land. It rolled over the city and onto the water, into the harbour, filled with the 18 ships that were forbidden to leave. This map shows their final positions. A fleet executed at anchor. The cloud hit the ships with unimaginable force. It snapped their anchor chains, blew them from the water, and set them on fire. The Roraima, the steamship that had arrived just 2 days earlier, was capsized and burned. Its cargo of potassium ignited. Of its 68 passengers and crew, only a handful, deep in the engine room, survived the initial blast. They would die of horrific burns hours later. The sea itself boiled. The cold water, meeting the 1,000-degree ash, flashed to steam, creating a tsunami that rocked the harbour. Today, the harbour of Saint-Pierre is a graveyard. Divers can visit the wrecks, silent in the deep. This is the Roraima as it rests today, a steel tomb, its massive boilers once full of steam, now covered in coral. The wreck of the Dahlia, another victim of the harbour trap. Its hull ripped open by the blast. The Biscay, a freighter, now a skeleton on the ocean floor. The wreck of the Tamaya, its nameplate still visible. And perhaps most haunting, the ship's bell of the Tamaya. The same bell that rang for the sailors just as the cathedral bell rang for the citizens. All silenced in the same instant. Back on land, the city was gone. It was 7:55 a.m. From the first explosion to the total annihilation of 30,000 people, it had taken less than 180 seconds. This is what the flow left behind, a bombed landscape, but this was not war, this was geology. The flow, as seen at Mount St. Helens, is a sterile grey moonscape. Nothing survives. At Mount Pelée, the flow was so powerful it deposited feet of this material, this pyroclastic fall, over the entire area, a new layer of earth burying the city that had once lived there. This is what the city looked like in the moments after, a smouldering, burning hellscape. This image, though a dramatic painting, captures the reality. The Paris of the Caribbean had become a vision from Dante's Inferno. The mountain itself was changed. Its crater, once a gentle bowl, was now a violent open wound. A new monstrous spine of rock was pushed from the crater, a tombstone for the city it had killed. It was named the Tower of Pelée. The beautiful landmark that once watched over the city was now a killer looming over a graveyard. This is a scientific illustration of the deposit, the ash flow that now was Saint-Pierre. It was not just the city. The entire northern part of the island was a zone of destruction. The blast was so hot it started fires in the village of Morne Rouge, miles away, where people had gathered in a chapel to pray. The city's beautiful botanical garden, incinerated, its collection of exotic plants, gone. The Pont Roche Bridge, once a symbol of modern engineering, now a twisted skeleton over a river of ash. The Place Bertin, the heart of the city, was unrecognizable. The lighthouse gone, the Chamber of Commerce gone, the bank gone. This is what remained: rubble, silence, and 30,000 souls. The city of Saint-Pierre and all 30,000 of its inhabitants were dead. It was a perfect and complete extermination. In the smouldering, suffocating silence, a rescue party landed. They were looking for survivors. They found only bodies. The newspapers of the world announced the impossible. Saint-Pierre wiped out. But in the ruins, they were about to find the most impossible story of all. When the ash cleared, there was nothing left to rescue. The city of Saint-Pierre was gone. This is what the rescue teams found: a silent, smoking panorama of death. A city erased from the earth. From the sea, it was a grey, featureless coast of rubble. The Place Bertin, the heart of the city, was a field of hot stones. The city was still on fire. The 1,000-degree blast had ignited the rum warehouses, sending flaming rivers through the ruins for days. Every street was a dead end, every building a tomb. This was once the Rue du Petit Versailles, the walls of homes ripped open, revealing nothing but pulverized ash. This was the Paris of the Caribbean. Now it was a modern Pompeii. The city's population of 30,000, it was reduced to this: twisted shapes in the ash, bodies flash-cremated at the moment of the blast. The search parties found not a single living thing, only the dead in the positions where they died. The Grand Theatre, the pride of the city, was a hollowed-out skull. Its magnificent staircase, once walked by the city's elite, now led to nowhere, a symbol of a culture vaporized. The theatre's elegant arches framing a scene of total desolation. This was the stage where opera companies from Paris once performed. The entire structure, once a temple of art, was now just a pile of bricks. But perhaps the most chilling artifact was found in the ruins of the cathedral. The great church bell, it hadn't just shattered, it had melted. This 6-ton piece of bronze was found like this, deformed, collapsed onto itself, a testament to the impossible, furnace-like heat of the blast. A solid object recording the exact moment the 1,000-degree cloud passed over the city. Colonial Health House, the city's asylum, was also a tomb. Its stone walls, which were supposed to protect its patients, were torn apart. The iron doors to its subterranean cells were bent and buckled. Inside these dark rooms there was no escape. The heat and suffocating gas found everyone. The hospital's latrines, its stairwells, its foundations. All that remained of an institution of 19th century science. This plaque, placed in the ruins, honors the nuns who died there, trying to comfort their patients. For 3 days, rescue teams walked through this hellscape. They found 30,000 dead and 0 survivors. The city was a write-off, a complete and total loss, the most perfect extermination by a volcano in modern history. And then, on the 4th day, they heard a sound, a faint human moan, coming from deep within the ruins of the city prison. This was the city prison. Like every other building, it was completely destroyed. The rescuers dug for hours, following the sound, moving superheated rubble with their bare hands. They dug until they found this: a solid stone box buried beneath the prison. The cacho, the dungeon. Its one tiny opening was a slit in a thick stone wall. They broke down the door, and inside they found a man, horribly burned, dehydrated, but alive. His name was Louis Mouttet. He was 27 years old, a local labourer. He was the sole survivor of Saint-Pierre. This is his cell. This is the room that saved the only life in a city of 30,000. How did he survive? He was a prisoner. On May 7th, the night before the eruption, he had been arrested for a drunken brawl. He was thrown into this cell, a windowless, stone-arched room partially underground. It was the most secure and most isolated room on the island. When the blast hit at 7:52 a.m., Mouttet was in total darkness. He said the air suddenly became unimaginably hot. A fine, hot ash shot through the tiny grate in the door like a blowtorch. It set his clothes on fire. He was seared but not vaporized. He was horribly burned on his back, arms and legs. The thick stone walls and the near-total lack of ventilation insulated him from the 1,000-degree instant death cloud that passed over the prison. He was cooked, but he was not cremated. He spent 4 days in this stone oven in total darkness, listening to the silence of the dead city, smelling his own burned flesh before he was rescued. This is Louis Mouttet weeks later, showing the horrific scars that covered his body. He was technically the only person to survive the pyroclastic flow from within the city. His story became legendary. He was pardoned for his crimes. How could you punish the man who had lived through the end of the world? He was billed as the man who lived through doomsday. He would travel the world showing his scars to horrified crowds, and sitting in a replica of the prison cell that had been his curse and then his salvation. This is the cell today. It remains the most visited spot in the ruins of Saint-Pierre, a monument to an impossible statistical miracle, the one man the volcano missed. The city of Saint-Pierre was never rebuilt. Its former residents and their descendants settled elsewhere. The ruins became a tourist attraction, a modern Pompeii, a ghost town haunted by the memory of 30,000 people. The theatre, the cathedral, the prison, all left as they were. A reminder of the moment when the sky fell and a city of 30,000 people paid the price for ignoring the sky. It is a city that belongs to the volcano now. The story of Saint-Pierre is a story of 2 men. A governor, Louis Mouttet, who, in his arrogance, walked into the city to die. And a prisoner, Louis Mouttet, who, by sheer luck, was locked in the one room that could let him live. A permanent, haunting reminder of the awesome, indifferent power of the earth.